Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Bryson Medlock, Threat Intelligence Evangelism Director, CW Cyber Research Unit, ConnectWise. Bryson, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Can you start by sharing a little bit about your journey so far?
I've been in the tech industry since the 90s, so I've been doing this a while. A bit of an old school nerd, sci-fi, fantasy, D&D, all that stuff that you can think about. And I started off just doing basic PC repair, working for a computer renaissance in a small town in Missouri. And then we've kind of gone from there doing system administration. I moved into the training world. I actually moved to the HR world for a while and ran talent development for a security company. I've spent a lot of time training, at least a decade, really just focused on training the next generation of security analysts. And then from there, have moved over to ConnectWise. I originally came over as part of a small security startup known as Perch that then got acquired by ConnectWise at the end of 2020 and have been here since. At Perch, I started off really just doing the security analyst role. And then from there, when we got acquired, we started the cyber research unit, which is our threat intelligence and security research role or department at ConnectWise. And I was one of the founding members of that, the only one that's still around. And now I spend most of my time, I spend about half of my time focused on building out infrastructure and building the tools that our team needs to do things on the back end. And then the other half of the time I'm doing reports and podcasts and conferences and communicating. So the experience that I've had doing all of that, those years of training, well, it's security training as well as like leadership training. I taught crucial conversations, crucial accountability, situational leadership, some of those like leadership type things, as well as teaching analysts how to decode packets. And sometimes I would do that in the same day. So it had a bit of a wide range of things that I would do. It's kind of led me to, I think kind of a unique position and a unique perspective because I've got a lot of experience in both sides of the world. I've seen the leadership side, I've seen even the HR side, but also I'm, got a lot of that technical experience as well.
Sounds like you run from layer 1 through layer 9.
Yeah, pretty much.
It struck me as you were talking about teaching about, decoding a packet and then teaching, leaders how to do the right thing at the same time. It's must make for an interesting day. So let's see, can you tell me a bit about any major life events that have shaped your leadership style?
When I really look at like how I approach leadership and just sort of life in general, I mentioned I'm a nerd. I read a lot of books, like probably 100 or more a year, mostly sci-fi and fantasy, occasionally some technical books, but I really enjoy that nerdy stuff. And there's a few sayings from some books that I've read that I really enjoy that have really kind of become my life philosophy. First is just don't panic. I've actually got it tattooed on my forearm. Don't panic from, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Large friendly letters.
Yes, exactly. In the world of cyber, we're always dealing with emergencies. And you can't panic. There's the panic response is reasonable and rational when you're facing a life or death situation, but most of the time when we're panicking, it's not life or death. And if you have to remove yourself for a moment and take a breath, whatever the case may be, but panicking never does any good. So yeah, that's probably the first thing that I kind of always keep in mind. Like I said, I've literally got it tattooed on my arm. So that's the first thing that I really think of when it comes to, life, the universe and everything is don't panic. Second, I'm a fan of the Stormlight Archive and the Knights Radiant Creed and the first oath, definitely the last part of that, which is journey before destination. So, we're all going to end up the same place. None of us are immortal. So all that stuff that happens before that journey, that's called life. And besides that, how you live your life, of course, is more important than the fact that you're going to die at the end. But also just when it essentially, it's the opposite of the ends justify the means. Outcomes matter and results do matter, but how you get there matters just as much. If you're taking shortcuts, if you're doing things that are unethical and things that you can't be proud of at the end of the day, that matters. That's important. So how you get there is just as important as the actual end result that you end up with. The next one, if we can move over to Doctor Who, Peter Capaldi knew the end before he had his whole regeneration. He started this little phrase that he would say was his like creed as the Doctor, which was never cruel, never cowardly, always be kind. And that one's really kind of stuck with me, especially in the past few years. There's a lot of cruelty and unkindness all over the world. If you actually look at human history, that humans being cruel to other humans is kind of the default throughout history. But it doesn't have to be that way, and I don't think that's necessarily normal. It's what we end up recording for history, but I really think when it comes down to any sort of social situation you're in, if you just try to be kind, you're always going to have a better outcome. So that's, I don't know, that to me, that's, I think, really important. Just plain kindness, just kindergarten basic of how do you deal with other humans.
Working and playing well with others.
Yeah, exactly. And then one more, going back to the Stormlight Archive, what's the most important step a person can take? What would your answer be to that? I'm just curious.
The next one.
Exactly. There you go. Yeah, the most important step, it's the next one. Everybody makes mistakes. Everybody fails. And you can't reject someone just because they made a mistake, just because they failed. What they do next is more important than the fact that they failed.
In many cases, they will become more efficient and effective in the future because they had that opportunity to learn, if you think about it the right way.
When I first got into the talent development and training world, and I started looking into that and reading about it and studying it and educating myself on how people learn and how does the brain work and what actually makes people remember things, what actually changes people's behaviors. In the talent development world, there's something they call friction, or specifically in the instructional design world, which is like how you create classes and training in such a way that people actually sticks and people actually learn, rather than just giving them a PowerPoint and expecting them to pick up on it. Like, how do you actually make that effective? There's this principle called friction, which essentially is, when it comes down to it, those problems that you dealt with in school, or the challenges that you faced that you failed at, those are the things you're going to remember. And what you learn from that experience are going to stick with you longer than the things that you just picked up on right away and you already knew.
I very clearly remember moments from the late 90s where I had spent the preceding 5 hours dragging my face back and forth across a keyboard and then finally figured something out, far more than any of the typical instruction I had had in my life. So that resonates. That's good. So we talked a little bit about mistakes and taking the next step after that. Is there a mistake that you made that led to significant growth?
There's a few like technical mistakes that I've made that had a big impact that kind of changed how I worked. Like one, when I was working for a web hosting company and I was just trying to clean up some like temporary files, and I wrote like a one-liner to do it. And there was accidentally a space in there somewhere where there shouldn't be, where I was assigning a variable. So the rm-rf slash ended up being the command that ran, and it started just like deleting the entire file system. A common mistake for young sysadmins. I did, have that verbose flag on there, so I saw it happening and was able to stop it right away.
That's almost worse, but
Well, thankfully, no data was actually lost. All it did was delete the bin directory, which in Linux, that's where all of your like executable files are. So the system stopped responding, but no data was lost. It was a couple hours downtime. It could have been much worse if I wasn't paying attention, but that's my never test in prod story, which I think everybody's got something like that. Thankfully, I've never ran into like real issues where I wish I had backups or like have lost a lot of data. But I've definitely made some mistakes that have caused downtime. And yeah, you've got to, in that situation, it was a matter of like looking at, okay, what did I do? It was a typo. It was a slip of a finger. So there, it accidentally hit a space. There's nothing I could have done about the space necessarily, but how I actually did the command. Essentially, it was as simple as just typing echo before, run through the command the first time, but put echo rm, so that when that you actually then run through the command, you can like see what the actual output is. Then you can just go back and press up and erase that echo, and that replaces it. But just doing a little bit of extra testing before you're ever doing anything destructive. Like, always know exactly what's going to happen. double check you've got backups, then double check the commands that you're typing. Essentially just paying attention to detail is important in this line of work.
Absolutely. Is there a mentor, past leader, somebody who really, really altered your trajectory?
There's a few people that have, gotten me to where I am today. There was so in my early career, I spent about 5 years working for a church in Joplin, Missouri, and it was doing IT work for them. It was a network about 50 computers, and I kind of did everything from printers to servers and web development and everything. But being a nonprofit organization, we had a lot of volunteers helping out because I was a staff of one, and one of the guys who came and helped me setting up a VPN server, he was a big fan of OpenBSD. He was actually on the staff of TourCon, which is a security conference in, I think, San Francisco. Well, it's in California. I haven't been, so I'm not exactly sure the city. But yeah, he was on the staff of TourCon, and he's the one who really got me interested in the security. Up until that point, I was just kind of doing IT and just doing general tech, and he was like, big time into security. This was like probably around 2005 or so, and the security world wasn't very big back then. It was very, very much Wild West. But he got me interested. I started reading up more stuff online. Got into root wars, which nowadays we just call those CTFs. But I did some early root wars. I got my OSCP back in like 2007, so it was like brand new. I never really got into the red teaming side of things, but I've always enjoyed CTFs and stuff. But yeah, I didn't ask him if I could mention his name, so I won't say who he is. But yeah, it was just a volunteer who had a lot of experience and just kind of got me interested and piqued that interest, and that really sort of steered my career from that point forward. And then when I was at the previous company before ConnectWise, for that stint of time where I was working under the HR department, or well, they call it talent management. But yeah, I was doing talent development and training. The person who I reported to was at the end of his career, really didn't know anything about tech, had spent all of his most of his life working for either in the financial sector or oil and gas doing talent development. And you just had lived an amazing life. You spent a couple years backpacking through Europe when he was, in college, and just had a lot of experience just dealing with people and management and training people. And he really took me under his wing and mentored me and just taught me a lot about, what it is to be a leader of people. And yeah, he was just a great guy and very supportive and just really there for me.
Can you tell me a little more about what it is to be a good leader of people?
I think a lot of it comes down to just recognizing what it means to be a human. That everybody is an individual. Everybody's got individual needs and wants and desires. They're going through their own life issues, life situation, and you can't just treat everybody the same. There's not a single leadership style or management style that works for everybody. If you're dealing with somebody just out of school and this is their first job, they're going to need a lot more hand holding. They're going to really need you to maybe even micromanage a little bit. I mean, especially if you're like training somebody in that first like 2 weeks, you really manage everything they do. But as they learn the job more, you can back off a little bit more and give them more responsibility. But then if you've got somebody who's got 10, 15 years of experience, they don't need that hand holding. And if you're going to treat them the same way as you treat that new person who just came out of school, then you're going to have a lot more conflict with that person. They're going to be less effective. So you've got to be able to like know when to trust and when to delegate. And it, like I said, it comes down to just kind of recognizing who people are and what they actually need, and their individual circumstances and their individual needs and desires.
What is the most rewarding aspect of your current job?
I've always liked just fixing things. I like finding problems and finding solutions to them. Yeah, that's always been what's driven me in my current role. Like one of the things that our team publishes every year, we do an annual MSP threat report. So we focus on like what are the actual threats targeting MSPs. Because at ConnectWise, we build software and solutions for MSPs. Those are our customers. If you work in the MSP space, you've heard of us. If you don't work in the MSP space, you probably haven't. So anyway, we publish this annual MSP threat report. The first year I was involved in that project, just trying to get all the data together and figure out, what are the actual threats. It was a bit of a task. I had, I spent literally months just reading through tickets and had a spreadsheet where I was trying to track all of this data. So trying to find a solution for that, we eventually went with found a threat intelligence platform that worked for us and kind of built out a lot of custom code and things, but like building that out and going from just having a bunch of spreadsheets that I'm keep trying to keep track of on my desktop to actually having a robust platform with AI built into it and all that, and being a part of that, building it out. Well, I didn't, write all the code for the underlying platform, wrote a lot of the pieces that went into it. I eventually, originally designed the architecture for what we had. We eventually moved to a SaaS platform, so now I don't have to worry about the tech side of it so much anymore. But yeah, just again, finding a solution, building out a solution, going from having to spend months of manual labor to just get something meaningful to now being able to click on a button and have a report pull up has just been very, very satisfying and rewarding.
Sounds like a big win. How do you approach building trust within a team?
So I mentioned that I'm a nerd. I'm into D&D. I'm the forever DM in one group. I've got a couple of groups I've been playing with. One back since like 2005. We're still playing together regularly. But as the dungeon master of a D&D group, you do a lot of group therapy. There's a lot of problem solving, and yeah, there's a lot of trying to build trust, and it comes back to just recognizing people as individuals and realizing their individual needs and desires and what they want out of, in this case, out of the game. When you're when they're trying to decide what to do next, I've given them a bunch of clues about the plot, and they're trying to decide where they want to go. You've got to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak, pay attention to what people are saying. The people in both the groups I play are spread out across the world, so we're always playing over Discord. So there's some issues with latency when people start talking, and so people talk over each other pretty regularly. It's not necessarily rudeness; it's part of the latency of the conversation. And so trying to again, you've got to pay attention and listen to people. And when somebody starts to speak up, but then somebody else is already speaking and they stop, you've got to make sure to like go back to them and make sure everybody has an opportunity to speak. And then, that's where it starts. And then honesty is important. And you've got to be able to have difficult conversations as well. And that's something I used to, or well, I mean, it's not easy. That's part of the definition. It's difficult, but that was some of my training and stuff that I did with Crucial Conversations that kind of helped me frame and figure out how to do that and how to focus on the right things. When it comes to those kind of conversations, it's important to focus on like the facts, the actual observable facts. Don't focus so much on the stories that people tell around those facts or the emotional responses, but focus on what actually happened, and then always give people the benefit of the doubt. There's it's very common for people to see something that happened or something that someone did and assign an intention to that. And the truth is, unless they've told you their intention, you don't know what their intention is.
And even then, you may not.
Yeah, and even then, exactly. So always give people the benefit of the doubt, have those difficult conversations with them and figure out what's actually happening, and then just being honest and listen.
What's your strategy for balancing the need for continued development of technical expertise with expanding your leadership capabilities?
As my career's gone a lot of different ways, sometimes I'm definitely way more focused on the technical side and sometimes I'm not. And it does seem like it is pretty easy to like lose track of the technical side when you're focused on the other side of things. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I really have a great answer for that. I guess what it really comes down to is if your role is not or doesn't include like a regular technical aspect to it, and you've got to know how to trust your people and trust your team. I think that that's an important aspect of any sort of leadership is, being able to have people that you can trust and you can rely on, assign somebody a task and trust that they'll get it done. If you don't have those people, then, it's hard to produce anything. But yeah, I mean, I do occasionally like just find some project that I find interesting. I'll just go off and do my own thing and, my own time and work on, like lately has, is everybody's into that. But, I did a little vibe coding for a little while, just seeing what it was like. Didn't like it. Was not productive, I thought. But that's a whole other topic.
What is your definition of success for you and your team?
So I think in order to like really be successful, it comes down to how do you feel at the end of the day? When you're not at work, are you content? That I think that's what success is about. Ultimately, like work-life balance is super important. But yeah, if you feel content with your day at the end of the day, that's and you're successful. And how that looks for each person is different. At a previous job I'd worked at, there was somebody who started the same day as me, and, like, 3 years later, when I had gone through multiple, like, changes in my job, and he was still at that same role, and, he seemed happy and content. So, for me, that seemed what might have been success for him. It wasn't for me, but it was for him. So, I don't think there's a single definition. It's just, yeah, whether are you content at the end of the day?
Like that ties nicely back to journey before destination.
Yeah.
Is there a daily routine that you find helpful?
I start off every morning just going through my daily feed. So, I've got a feed reader, just keeping up to date on all the news, especially since my world is threat intelligence. You've got to know what's going on, and there's always something new every day. So I start the day probably, 30 minutes to an hour, just kind of going through my feed reader and trying to check all the news. And then there's some like chat groups that I'm in that where there's a lot of threat intelligence shared. And so I'm just kind of going through those. So that's probably the only part of my day that's probably a routine. Beyond that, it's, my work is very project focused or event focused. So it just depends on what the next project or event is.
If you find yourself feeling overwhelmed, unfocused, out of tune, how do you get back on track?
So the first step is to just, get up and walk around a little bit, go grab a drink of water, go to the bathroom, whatever. Just move for a little while and then come back, and if you're still having trouble focusing, find some small task or project that you can do and succeed at. Get a small win in there, and that kind of helps get the dopamine receptors firing, and can help you kind of get focused back onto whatever the task was that you were working on before.
Is there one thing you do as a leader that you'd like to see more leaders doing?
Going back to what I was saying at the very beginning, I think that the phrase "always be kind." In the corporate world, there can be a lot of politics, and there are a lot of it is common to see people in a leadership position to kind of lord it over the people under them. I don't know. It's not always there, but there is definitely a lot of cruelty in the corporate world. That may be a little bit too harsh to say it that way, but kindness isn't always something that people keep in mind when they're dealing with other people. I think they get too focused on outcomes, too focused on the financial aspect of things. And I understand we're a business and that's the goal. But the people that we're working with, if they don't feel welcome, if don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel well treated, they're not going to work as well. They're not going to be there as long. There's no reason to add unhappiness to the world. There's no reason to add unkindness to the world. So yeah, always be kind. I think more than anything else, I would just like to see people really living that out. I think that's a message that the world as a whole really needs to take to heart.
I agree. Are there any strategies you use to bring more kindness into your organization?
I guess try to live by example. Be careful what you say. I try to listen more and think about what I'm going to say before I say it, because I, have learned from the past when I was young and irrational that if I don't think first, I may say something hurtful. And I'm not perfect. I definitely fail and stumble, and then sometimes just maybe joke around and say things I shouldn't, or say things that might hurt someone's feelings if I'm not thinking about it carefully. But yeah, just listen first, think about what you're saying, try to be kind, and yeah, as far as influencing other people, that's I just try to demonstrate that.
What does an effective team culture look like to you, and how do you cultivate it?
I mean, an effective team culture is where everyone feels included. and making sure people are heard, making sure you're listening to people when you're in a meeting, making sure everyone's opinions are stated. I don't know, just inclusivity and listening are some crucial aspects of having an effective culture. Ultimately, it just comes down to people feeling included and part of the team. And then how that looks for your specific culture is going to depend on the team members. When you're listening to people and you find out what their interests are, trying to include those. So giving, more examples from D&D. Not everybody has the same level of commitment to the game. And, so you don't expect the same level of commitment. Some people come up with like very detailed backstories of their character, and some people are just like, yeah, I'm a rogue, and that's like all you get. So, but understanding what that means for that person who spent hours writing like 10-page detailed background, they want you to use that information. So make that part of the plot. Make that part of what your team is doing. And the person who doesn't really care that much, well, then, that's fine too. But just getting to know the people on your team, are their interests, how can you incorporate that into the day to day, and just making it, again, just trying to make everybody feel included.
I'm starting to imagine an employee character sheet with different attributes and,
Yeah, I probably play too much. I spend a lot of time thinking about things in D&D terms.
I understand. How do you approach difficult decisions?
I don't know that I have a real great strategy. I do have a tendency to overthink and overanalyze, and then, go with your gut at the end.
I know that model. I know it well.
Yeah, I mean, at least if I'm being perfectly honest, that's how I, naturally how I would go about it is analyze every aspect of it, trying to get as much data as I can. And if there's a clear and obvious, oh, this is so much better than the other, then that's great, but there isn't always. And then it ends up a lot of times being a gut decision. But that gut decision though does come from, 20 plus years of experience and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then, just trying to stick with the, life philosophies that we've kind of already talked about. It's if they're relevant, it depends on what the decision is. But yeah, and then also just, involving other people is important, getting other perspectives. There's been a number of, difficult decisions I've had to made where it's the correct decision may not have been like the way I wanted to go, but talking to other people and like the people who maybe were more impacted than I am, and realizing, of course their opinions matter as well, and trying to include that, and even going against my gut at times, because I knew it was better for all the other people involved.
What is your go-to advice to other people in the field?
So if we're talking about somebody new to the field or somebody interested in cybersecurity, because I do have a lot of young people asking me about how do we get into this career, how do we get into this field, that sort of thing. It's not an easy field to be in. That's the first thing. Burnout is super common. So first of all, if you really want to be successful, you've got to be a very curious person. Now, that depends on what aspect of cybersecurity you're also getting into, because cybersecurity isn't a single job. It's hundreds of different jobs. It's a huge field. There's so many different ways you could go through it, from, red team, blue team, purple team, but also there's, cybersecurity lawyers and cybersecurity insurance. There's so many different things you could do and still be in cybersecurity. So it does vary depending on like what aspect you're into. But if we're talking about more like on the technical side of things, like especially like red team, blue team, being curious about how things work and why they are that way, that's probably the most important question you could ask in this world, is why. It's not so much, okay, if I send this specific packet, then the server crashes, but why does it crash? And that's where the real success comes from in this field, is you've got to be super curious, and you've got to really have a drive to understand why things are the way that they are. So that's probably the first thing that I would suggest. And if that's not you, then maybe this isn't the career for you, because if we're being completely frank and honest and having a difficult conversation here, people are having a hard time breaking into the security world today. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants for every job out there, and it's not easy to break into. That's what I keep seeing and hearing from young people, fresh out of college. All these people, when 5, 10 years ago, when there was 100 jobs for every person, skilled person out there, now that's kind of flipped because everybody wanted to jump into this, this high paying career. And then, computer science is just kind of having that problem overall. I think the market's probably trying to like readjust, but yeah, that's a huge problem a lot of people are dealing with. So you've got to have that curiosity. And then the other thing I tell them is you're going to have way more success knowing someone than just filling out random applications. So it's going to vary depending on where you live, but there are lots of regional groups you can get involved with, or even, online groups you can get involved with. But things like, OWASP or 2600, there's still a few 2600 groups out there if you're familiar with them, or B-sides. Get involved with your local B-sides, or maybe start a local B-sides. Find some other people and start one, and host your own. Go out on a limb and do a talk at B-sides. It doesn't have to be super advanced. There's a lot of like beginners, but the more you can do to get to know other people in the field, and the more you can do to get your name out there, the better, the more success you're going to have.
Makes sense. So, talking more about new people in the field, what's your approach to mentoring the next generation?
I mentioned that curiosity is important, but also like being able to figure things out on your own is important. When I was running the training program for security analysts, the first class I had it for every new person, I called it RTFM. Read the fancy manual.
The fine manual or yeah.
Yeah, read the fine manual, read the fancy manual, whatever F word you want to use there. And that class was all about how to find answers. So, we of course we used, Linux command line. So I taught them how to use the man command. So that was, the first part, but also just where's the documentation within the company? How do you actually find answers on Google? That sort of thing. And then whenever, they'd ask a question, I'd try to steer them towards the resources where they could find the answer instead of just giving the answer. But I think that is a crucial skill that everybody in this field needs, is how do you figure it out? It's not just having that curiosity, but then how do you actually find the answer? And yeah, that's, I think a lot of my mentoring is focused more on, don't give people the answers, but encouraging them to have the right tool set to find the answers themselves.
Giving a fish versus teaching fishing.
Yeah.
All right. Can you recommend any resources, books, podcasts, etc., that have helped you along the way?
So depending on what area in the field you're looking to get into, I really like, CTFs and those kind of hands-on challenges. I've organized a bunch. When I worked at my last company and doing training, that was like a regular thing we would do every quarter. We'd have a CTF, and I would organize those. And then even at ConnectWise, we've done several where I've organized those. For a while, I was doing a my own stream and YouTube channel where I was going over like CTFs and stuff. It was a lot of work, so I quit doing that. It's still there if you want to look it up, CTF and cigars, because I would review a cigar and then talk about the CTF. I quit smoking cigars, and I haven't been doing many CTFs lately because I've been more focused on the threat intel stuff. But yeah, those any kind of like hands-on challenges are super useful. Just reading through a book is only going to get you so far, but actually getting out there and trying things. So it's a great way to get to know people too. Like there's websites like CTF Time, where you can form a CTF team and you can see all the CTFs coming up. There's probably 2 or 3 every week somewhere. There's always CTFs going on. So there's all of these different things you can get involved with. And they're not all just hacking. There's different versions as well. There's like OSINT CTFs where you are, looking for missing persons, that sort of thing, like actual real cases. I forget the name of that one. But yeah, there's, OSINT challenges, and there's blue team challenges as well as red team challenges. Just there's it's a big industry these days. CTFs are everywhere, and they're an easy way for you to get involved and to get hands-on experience. And if you do well, they can also look good on resumes. So I like to encourage people to get involved with those. I think they're great resources. There's a few websites there where you can go to just kind of get involved. I mentioned CTF Time, and then there's like the typical Try Hack Me or Hack the Box, some websites like that that you can get involved with that give you like training alongside with the actual like hands-on exercises. I don't have any specific like books or I mean this is a great podcast to listen to, I'm sure. I don't listen to a lot of podcasts and most of the books that I'm reading are more on the sci-fi fantasy side of things. I think that most of my actual like learning on technical stuff really just comes from either like the daily feeds that I'm reading or when I encounter a problem and I've got to go research it and then it's just using, Google food.
I imagine the CTFs also help quite a bit with time management when it comes to doing it in the real world.
Yeah, I suppose so. There's always a time crunch and getting there before somebody else is important.
What would you say is the hardest transition you faced as you moved up the ladder?
So when you first start out in a job, it's very clear, or it's usually pretty clear what's expected of you, what things you have to do. You're as if you're working in a SOC as a security analyst, you've got alerts, you've got a board in front of you with tasks to do, all these alerts you've got to respond to. And you don't have to think too much about what do I have to do next. But as you kind of move up and you get more independent, you're the one who's really kind of got to determine and decide what is it that we need to do next. And not just what is it that I need to do next, but what is it that the team needs to do next? What do we need to focus on? And yeah, that's I think has been a little bit of or has been a more difficult transition for me because I have a natural tendency to want to overanalyze things. So, actually deciding what's best for the team and which way we go. And that's just something that, again, ask other people and takes time and experience. But yeah, that's probably been the hardest part for me.
Do you see any trends developing in the space that are going to change the way we manage our teams?
Well, the biggest trend that's kind of changing everything right now are LLMs. They're disrupting everything. They're breaking things and they're fixing things and they're a solution looking for a problem. They have a lot of great potential and can do a lot of really great things, but people are trying to shoehorn them into everything. And so it's definitely changing how I think everybody's doing everything. I mean, I'm not sure how exactly the best way to say that is, but there was a study a couple months ago that was saying something like 90% of all AI projects are failing. And it's not so much that, AI is bad, it's just that it's new and people aren't sure what to do with it yet. And so they're trying to do everything with it. And how that's going to look over the next 10 years, I don't know. I see it having a major impact. It's already had a major impact in a lot of ways, but definitely I think the next 10 years are going to kind of make or break how we deal with AI. We're in a bubble. That bubble's probably going to pop pretty soon. And a lot of the things that people have done, a lot of companies and startups are going to fail. And then, was talking with somebody just earlier this week. They were talking about like, the dot-com bubble and a similar kind of thing. But all of the major tech companies that, have come are the big tech companies now came around really after the tech bubble burst. So what does AI look like 10 years from now is going to be vastly different than what it does now. And yeah, it's going to change how managers interact with their teams. It's going to change how people produce whatever it is they produce. It's such a game changer and such a cool new technology. It's gonna be the biggest thing that like I said, I don't know where it's gonna go, but I know it's definitely is changing and it's gonna continue to change really everything.
I don't see how we can avoid that. All right. So when you're hiring for your team, what are the critical qualities you're looking for and how do you screen?
I'm looking for people who I mean, I've already mentioned some of these things, but they're curious. They're looking for answers. Some of the best hires that I've had in the past are people that we originally rejected. I gave them feedback, and then they came back later, and you could tell they've actually like took that feedback to heart and grew or changed in the way you recommended. Whether it was like a technical aspect or even personal. I'm not like super involved in hiring now. When I was in the training department, I was like the guy who did all the pre-screening. So yeah, it was pretty common if there was some sort of or a lot of the technical pre-screening. But yeah, there were a number of people that we rejected, and then I'd give them feedback, and they'd come back and they did better. That's definitely a win. But also, again, depending on the actual role and what's required of them, but are they involved, or are they really interested in security? Are they reading about it? Do they have, do they have feeds that they follow, or podcast, or is this something that they're consuming on a regular basis, or is it just a job, just a paycheck? And while there's certainly a place for people who do this just as a paycheck, I'm not necessarily completely opposed to that. Those aren't going to be your top performers. They're going to be like people who do the job, but they're not really going to go anywhere. They're going to be that level one tech for 10 years. And that's fine. You need those people, but that's not what you're ideally looking for. You're looking for that person who's going to be a superstar, and having those interests outside of work as well. The people who are involved in CTFs, that's usually an outside of work kind of thing. So if the somebody who can just list off, these are the websites, these are the feeds, this is where I'm getting my news from. People are actually getting security news, that sort of thing. Anything that shows an actual real interest in the role. Those are kind of some of the key aspects I'm looking for.
All right. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. So before we wrap it up, if people would like to follow along with your work, where's the best place to go?
Most of what I'm doing these days is going to LinkedIn at the ConnectWise Cyber Research Unit newsletter. So the regular reports that we publish, that's where they go. And then, yeah, that probably would be the best place to find me.
Awesome. Bryson, thanks for the time. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you.